Leora ran through the wreckage of the city with her ears angled forward, picking up the faintest vibrations in the cracked metal underfoot. She adjusted the grip on her crystalline blade, the thing humming faintly like a cat that had swallowed a tuning fork. Another screeching roar erupted from the rubble and she muttered, "Really? Is that all you've got? My plants at home are scarier." Her long ears twitched at the sound of a shifting shadow above. She vaulted over a chunk of debris, landing in a crouch and flicking her wrist. The blade sang as it struck, severing one of the many multi-limbed creatures that lurked in the half-collapsed streets. Its tentacles flailed, spraying glittering spores that stuck to everything nearby, including her own boot, and she flicked them off like an annoyed cat flicking dust from its fur. "Great! Now I'm wearing confetti. Fantastic!" She sprinted along the twisted corridor of steel and broken glass, the city groaning under the strain of unseen forces. The monsters, if they could be called that without insulting biology, shifted unnaturally, some with limbs that looped in impossible angles, some with eyes that blinked at odd intervals. One of them stumbled into her path, tripped over its own tentacle and fell flat, bouncing slightly like a deranged rubber ball. Leora smirked. "You've been practicing, haven't you? Too bad it didn't help." She kicked it aside and continued, each movement precise, each breath measured. But somewhere in her head, a tiny laugh whispered that the universe clearly had a sense of humor when it came to monster design. A spasm of lights flickered along the far building, indicating another incoming wave. Leora ducked under a collapsing beam, rolling onto her knees with a grunt. The creature that had been trailing her leapt, and she twirled midair, her blade slicing in a line of pale blue light. It shrieked, glittering spores erupting everywhere like fireworks gone wrong, and Leora coughed through the cloud, waving her hands and saying, "Really? Who programmed you? A toddler with a glitter obsession." The momentary humor made her forget briefly that she had been alone for days, every fight a solitary dance with chaos. She paused atop a ruined platform to catch her breath, glancing down at the street below where another pack of monsters had gathered, their movements coordinated in strange, jittering patterns. "Oh good! A party," she muttered, wiping the spore from her eyes. She leapt down, landing lightly, ears flicking to sense vibrations, anticipating movements that would have shattered a lesser fighter. She ducked a snapping maw, shoved a spindly arm aside, and spun in a fluid arc. Each swing of her blade left trails of light, reflecting off the glass and steel, turning the street into a chaotic light show that would have made an artist cry with envy. And somewhere amidst the chaos, Leora laughed. Not a quiet laugh, but a loud, defiant one that startled a few of the monsters and probably confused them into hesitation. A creature larger than the rest slithered from the shadows, its eyes glowing in mismatched colors. Leora sized it up, noticing its uneven gait and the way it seemed to hesitate in thought, almost as if it were debating whether to attack or inspect a particularly shiny piece of debris. "Well, I suppose manners are optional, but a little courtesy would be nice," she said aloud. The creature lunged, and she ducked, rolling under it, then swept her leg and tripped it. It crashed into the street with a thunderous groan. She clambered to her feet and panted. "I swear, this is easier than my last blind date, and at least this one bites less frequently." Her thoughts flicked to the supply caches she had been hunting, scattered across the city like forgotten crumbs. One of the monsters reared up behind her, and she elbowed it in the jaw, muttering, "I'd apologize, but I'm late for tea." She darted forward, weaving through the maze of half-collapsed buildings, her boots clanging on steel and glass. Sparks flew when her blade made contact with a metallic limb, reflecting off her long ears in a strange, ghostly halo. She had no illusions about the danger, but she refused to let despair set in. Humor was her shield, sarcasm her armor, and sometimes when she fought alone in the ruined streets, it felt almost like a game. A dark, dangerous game, but a game nonetheless. As she rounded a corner, she paused abruptly. The vibration underfoot wasn't random, it was deliberate. Someone or something was moving with purpose. Her ears twitched forward and she crouched low, peering through the smoke and dust. A figure emerged, clumsy, obviously human, tripping over rubble with a clatter that set every nearby monster on edge. Leora blinked. "Well, this should be interesting," she said with a grin, not quite certain whether to be irritated or amused. The human raised a weapon, a bulky thing that looked far too loud and unwieldy for subtle fighting, and shouted, "Hello, anybody," before a creature lunged at him. Leora rolled her eyes and leapt, intercepting it midair. "Step 1, avoid getting eaten," she called, yanking the human out of the way. He landed on his back, groaning, and she muttered, "Step 2, try not to trip over your own feet. Step 3, I'll think of it later." The human scrambled to his feet, rubbing his helmeted head, and finally looked at her, wide-eyed, as if the universe had just introduced him to the strangest, most lethal tour guide imaginable. Leora flicked a strand of hair from her face and smirked. "Welcome to my city. Monsters, glitter, and occasional sarcasm included at no extra cost." The monsters regrouped, sensing 2 targets now instead of 1, and Leora pointed to the nearest one, already calculating the trajectory of her next move. "All right, cowboy," she said, her tone teasing but sharp. "You follow me and try not to embarrass yourself too badly. The monsters don't need help laughing at you." The human soldier saluted, despite the ridiculousness of the situation, and Leora snorted. "That's step 4, learn humor in the middle of chaos. Step 5, survive. Good luck." They launched into battle together, an odd but strangely effective team. Leora twirled, her blade slicing with light and sound, and the human fired indiscriminately, sometimes hitting the target, sometimes hitting a wall, but always providing distraction. One of the monsters tripped over a pile of debris, causing the human to shout, "Ha, nailed it." Leora laughed mid-spin, ears flicking back in amusement. "Yes, because that was clearly part of the plan," she said. Sparks flew, monsters screeched, and somewhere in the midst of it all, the 2 of them moved in tandem, humor and chaos mixing with survival instincts in a dance that was as beautiful as it was deadly. And as the rubble cracked and monsters fell in odd, glittering heaps, Leora realized something she hadn't in days. She wasn't alone anymore. The city might still be a disaster zone, monsters were still absurdly lethal, and her life was still hanging by a thread. But for the first time, the edge of her exhaustion was softened by laughter, and the strangest form of companionship had arrived just in time. She twirled her blade once more, catching the light, and quipped, "All right, cowboy, let's see if you can keep up, or at least don't die spectacularly." The first time Elias tried to follow Leora's lead, he almost tripped over a fallen beam and landed flat on his face, a half-formed curse leaving his lips as sparks from a nearby plasma burst rained around him. Leora's long ears twitched in irritation, and she muttered under her breath, "Bravo, cowboy, truly subtle. Did your training include face-planting drills?" He groaned, scrambling to his feet, helmet askew, and gave a sheepish grin. "Just testing gravity," he said. Leora rolled her eyes, already bounding forward, her crystalline blade slicing through the shadows as if the monsters themselves were afraid of her choreography. "Keep up, or at least try not to make it obvious that you're allergic to coordination," she called over her shoulder. The monsters were smarter now, their movements more deliberate. They didn't just rush or attack blindly. They circled, probed, and sometimes paused, as if exchanging signals in a language made of pulsing lights and vibrating limbs. Leora had begun deciphering some of their patterns, her ears flicking like antennae, but Elias struggled to keep pace with her almost prescient reactions. Still, he found moments to contribute in ways that were surprisingly effective. A well-placed explosive grenade here, a distracting yell there, or just being obnoxiously loud enough to confuse the monsters. Leora sighed and muttered, "I don't know if you're helping or auditioning for monster karaoke." They entered a narrow alley, the walls of metal and crystal shards bending light into strange rainbows. Leora flipped onto a ledge above, narrowly avoiding a monster leaping from the opposite side. "Come on, human. Gravity's optional if you have style. She landed gracefully on another platform, her ears flicking forward as she scanned for the next threat. Elias huffed and muttered about acrophobia, hopping after her like a reluctant frog. One of the monsters tried to grab him, and Leora launched a swing, sending it crashing into a wall. Elias wiped a smear of glowing ichor off his face and said, "Thanks for the save. I owe you one." Leora tilted her head and quipped, "Save. I think you'd owe me a few dozen if you survive this, cowboy." As they moved deeper into the city, Leora noticed changes in the monsters' behavior. Their coordinated attacks were evolving, their pulses of light faster, more precise. "Great," she said, flicking her wrist to deflect a strike. "They're learning, just when I was hoping for an easy Friday night." Elias tried to keep pace, firing at targets as they appeared. "Easy," he said, rolling to avoid a snapping tendril. "I've been hit 3 times," my lunch exploded, "and I think one of them just winked at me." Leora snorted, ducking under another blow, and muttered, "Winking is optional. Survival is mandatory." They reached a plaza where the ground had partially collapsed, revealing glowing pools of liquid that hissed when touched. Leora landed on the edge, ears flicking in curiosity and caution, sensing the subtle vibrations in the unstable floor. "Step lightly," she warned, "or we'll end up in a spa treatment neither of us asked for." Elias looked down at the glowing goo and said, "I don't even want to imagine the price for that treatment." Leora gave him a look, raising an eyebrow. "Insurance doesn't cover monster acid bath, trust me." One of the larger monsters emerged, its limbs coiling like cables, its eyes flickering with intelligent malice. Leora leapt into action, spinning, ducking, striking, all while keeping an ear tuned to the faintest vibrations of its approach. Elias tried to assist, throwing a grenade that bounced off a shard of metal and rolled harmlessly away. Leora's ears twitched and she muttered, "Really? That's your best contribution so far." The human threw up his hands. "Hey, I warned you about my style points." She snorted, ducking a snap of the creature's limb, and then, in a perfect arc, landed behind it and plunged her blade into its side. It let out a shriek that sounded suspiciously like laughter, and Elias couldn't help but comment, "Did it just laugh at us?" Leora shook her head. "Nope. That's horror mixed with sarcasm, totally different from actual laughter." They continued across the ruined plaza, working together in a rhythm that was beginning to make sense. Leora anticipated the monster's moves, while Elias provided cover fire, sometimes accidentally hitting targets but mostly creating enough chaos to give them both an advantage. Leora threw a glance at him mid-swing and said, "You're getting better, human. Less tripping, slightly less screaming. Improvement is measurable." Elias gave a mock salute. "I'll take that as a compliment and maybe a badge." At the edge of the plaza, they discovered a tunnel leading into the heart of the city. Leora sensed multiple vibrations, their frequency erratic, indicating the monsters were concentrating forces deeper inside. "All right," she said, crouching and scanning the tunnel, "things are about to get ugly. And by ugly, I mean absolutely ridiculous. Brace yourself, cowboy." Elias adjusted his weapon nervously. "I've got my game face on," he said, though his eyebrows betrayed a hint of panic. Leora snorted. "Your game face is one step away from 'please don't let me die,' but sure, let's go with that." As they advanced, the monsters became increasingly coordinated, their pulsing lights almost hypnotic, and Elias found himself moving in ways that surprised him. He ducked, spun, and even managed a few effective shots. Leora noticed the subtle changes and teased, "Look at you, moving like a professional or at least a slightly less embarrassing amateur." He grinned, dodging a snapping limb. "Hey, I'll take less embarrassing. Progress is progress." Deep in the tunnel, they found a monstrous creature that towered over the collapsed ceiling, its limbs tangled with the walls, glowing eyes scanning the chamber. Leora's ears flicked forward, calculating angles, timing, and trajectory. "This one is stubborn," she muttered, twirling her blade. Elias swallowed. I like stubborn, less moody than my ex. Leora rolled her eyes. Stick to the plan, cowboy, your humor might get us eaten. They moved together, a chaotic yet effective partnership, dodging, spinning, attacking, and occasionally exchanging sarcastic quips amidst the chaos. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had lost all meaning. Later, the creature fell in a heap of glowing limbs and defeated intelligence. Leora landed beside Elias, panting, ears flicking in exhaustion and amusement. He looked at her and said, "You know, for someone who fights monsters alone, you're kind of fun." Leora smirked, wiping a smear of glowing goo off her blade. "Kind of. I'm terrifyingly fun, human, and don't get used to me making sense. Humor is part of the survival package." They paused for a brief moment, surveying the ruined city, the flickering lights, and the distant echoes of monsters regrouping. For a fleeting second, they laughed together, not at the monsters, not at the chaos, but at the absurdity of their partnership, the improbable alliance that had begun amidst ruin and glittering danger. Leora flicked her blade casually, eyes scanning the horizon. "Ready for the next wave, cowboy." Elias tightened his grip on his weapon, a grin breaking through his fatigue. "Born ready." And with that, they moved forward, an unlikely team in a ridiculous, dangerous, and exhilarating dance that was only just beginning. Humor and skill intertwined, each quip, dodge, and strike bringing them closer together, not just as fighters, but as companions navigating the chaos of a world that refused to stay dead, calm, or predictable. The cavern stretched before them, impossibly vast, its ceiling lost in shadows, walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that cast everything in a greenish glow. Leora crouched at the edge of a fractured platform, her long ears twitching like twin radar dishes, sensing the thrumming vibrations of the creatures below. Elias stood beside her, gripping his weapon, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple despite the chill that radiated from the cavern's glowing floor. "So, how many are we talking?" he asked, his voice a mixture of dread and curiosity. Leora's eyes narrowed and she quipped, "Enough to make your grandmother rethink her vacation advice. Let's say a small army with trust issues." Elias gave a nervous chuckle. "Trust issues, huh? I can relate." They descended into the cavern, moving carefully over fractured platforms, balancing over pools of glowing liquid that hissed and fumed. The monsters had gathered in swarms, their pulsing lights forming a chaotic, hypnotic rhythm, almost like a heartbeat for the cavern itself. Leora adjusted her blade, spinning it experimentally, and muttered, "All right, cowboy, we're going to have to be inventive. Follow my lead, try not to scream too loudly, and above all, look impressive while we're at it." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Look impressive? I thought we were aiming for survival." She smirked. "Details, details. Survival is just stage, one of looking good while doing it." The monsters surged forward as if on cue, a living tide of chitin, claws, and glowing eyes. Leora leapt, spinning through the air, her blade humming in precise arcs that cut through tendrils and limbs, each strike punctuated by a dry joke. "Really, Glitterspit? Is that your finishing move?" Elias tried to keep up, ducking and firing, his shots sometimes wild but effective in surprising the monsters. One of the larger creatures lunged at him, and he yelped, only to have Leora vault over it, blade plunging into its side while muttering, "Next time try to duck first, scream later." He laughed breathless, "I'll take notes." As they fought deeper into the cavern, Leora began to notice the monsters, coordination fracturing under their combined assault. Elia's unpredictable movements, his loud shouts, and her precise strikes created a synergy neither had anticipated. "You know," she said mid-spin, ears flicking to dodge a snapping limb, "I thought humans were supposed to be clumsy. You're less disastrous than advertised." Elias grinned, rolling under a tendril. "That's high praise coming from someone who looks like she dances on broken glass for fun." The largest monster, a grotesque colossus with limbs that split into writhing branches, emerged from the shadows, shaking the cavern floor. Leora paused, calculating angles, timing, and trajectories with the precision of a predator and the playfulness of a prankster. "This one's stubborn," she said aloud. Elias peered at it nervously. "Stubborn? That's putting it mildly. That thing looks like it went to charm school and failed spectacularly." Leora snorted. "Charm school failed, yes. Apocalypse training succeeded. Watch and learn." They moved together, a bizarre yet effective duo, dodging, striking, and communicating in unspoken signals. Flashes of movement, subtle ear flicks, and gestures that even now Elias struggled to interpret but followed instinctively. He tossed a grenade that bounced perfectly, disrupting the monster's coordination, while Leora vaulted into the air, landing a strike that sent glowing shards of chitin spiraling through the air. "Nice throw, human. You almost look like you planned that," she teased. "Almost," he shot back. "I'll take it." The colossus roared, its limbs lashing, but their combined efforts began to wear it down. Leora led the monster into a corner of the cavern where the walls pulsed with unstable energy, whispering to her in vibrations she could almost understand. "All right, cowboy," she said. "Hold it right there. We're going to make this a performance to remember." She slashed a series of precise arcs, sending the colossus stumbling into the energy veins. Sparks and pulses erupted, and the monster shrieked in a sound that was half rage, half surprise. Elias dodged a collapsing chunk of ceiling and quipped, "I knew I should have bought hazard pay." Leora laughed mid-strike, her ears flicking like twin flags of defiance. As the monster fell, quivering and finally collapsing, Leora and Elias landed beside it, breathing heavily, a thin layer of glowing dust coating their armor. Elias looked at her, eyes wide, and said, "We actually did it together." Leora's expression softened, a rare moment without sarcasm. "Yes, together, not just surviving but actually working." She flicked a strand of hair from her face. "Funny how having someone else around changes the whole rhythm. I thought I liked being alone. Turns out I like this more." They continued through the cavern, clearing smaller monsters with a mix of skill and humor, their partnership now seamless. Each quip and jest eased the tension, even as the creatures' numbers dwindled under their combined assault. Leora began to teach Elias subtle tricks, timing, angle, anticipating movements, and he adapted with surprising skill, his confidence growing with every narrow escape. "See," she said, landing gracefully. "Humans can learn eventually." Elias mock saluted. Eventually is better than never. By the time they reached the heart of the cavern, the remaining monsters were scattered and disoriented, their coordination broken. Leora's ears twitched as she sensed a final pulse, a lingering intelligence among the defeated. She approached it cautiously, her blade ready, but hesitated. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "even monsters need a choice." Elias looked at her, puzzled. She gestured, ears flicking toward a glowing fissure. "We let it go. It won't attack, not today." The creature paused, then retreated into the shadows, leaving the cavern silent except for the echo of dripping liquid. Leora turned to Elias, smiling softly. "We survived. Not just me, not just you, together." Elias grinned, brushing glowing dust off his armor. "And we didn't even kill each other. That's progress, right?" She laughed, a sound that felt light in the cavern's gloom. "That's progress, cowboy, big progress." They climbed out of the cavern, the sun, or whatever approximated a sun here, shimmering across the jagged city skyline. Leora paused, ears flicking, watching the horizon. She had changed. The solitude that once defined her was replaced with something sharper, stronger, yet warmer. Trust, camaraderie, and the absurd joy of sharing danger with someone who wasn't entirely alien to her. Elias, looking at her with admiration and exasperation in equal measure, reflected a similar change. Confidence tempered with humility, the realization that survival was better shared, and that humor could be a weapon as sharp as any blade. They walked through the ruins, joking and nudging at each other, the remnants of their laughter echoing off broken walls. The city, scarred but alive, seemed to pulse in approval, the alien glow of the streets now a backdrop to a partnership forged in chaos, laughter, and light. Leora flicked her blade experimentally, catching the light one last time. So, cowboy, ready for the next disaster. Elias smiled, shouldering his weapon, born ready but maybe with slightly less screaming this time. And as they moved forward, the monsters scattered, and the city slowly settling into eerie calm. Both of them understood that the journey had changed them. Leora's humor and resilience had deepened into trust and connection, while Elia's bravery had sharpened into skill and awareness, tempered by laughter and humility. Together, they were no longer just fighter and soldier. They were companions, allies, and perhaps the beginning of a bridge between two worlds that had never fully understood each other, proving that even in the most dangerous, absurd, and glittering chaos, life, humor, and courage could prevail.